Welcome to the Capitol Forum's 6th Antitrust Thought Leaders interview series sponsored by KL Discovery. My name is David Blotner, and we are delighted to have Mike Knight here with us again today.
Thank you.
Mike's a partner at Jones Day. Mike served as an assistant director of the Federal Trade Commission's Bureau of Competition from 2003 to 2007, heading the Bureau's Mergers II division, and served as a trial attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice Antitrust Division from 1997 to 2000. So everything you learned there, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So we're going to talk today a little bit about what's going on with the new change in administration. So let's talk a little bit about what's your sense of how the merger enforcement landscape has changed since the new administrations have come in.
Sure. I think it's fair to say it's obviously at some level it's early yet, particularly at the FTC, where the new slate of commissioners has not yet been confirmed. But I think it's fair to say that we haven't seen a sea change yet. What we have seen, staff is continuing to bring the cases that they want to push. I think that's been fairly aggressive, and I think that's going back to the Obama administration as well. So I think we haven't seen dramatic change yet. That said, I think when you turn to DOJ specifically, where we do have some new folks to talk about, I think you certainly can say that this is not your parents' Republican administration. Historically, I think you could count on Republican administrations to be perhaps a little more willing to hear business arguments, a little more friendly toward merging parties, and I think frankly that comes out of or came out of a genuine belief that they wanted to make sure they weren't artificially enforcing against mergers that were actually pro-competitive. So their concern was, hey, let's make sure we don't block a good merger when it should go through. I think that this crew still has what I tend to think of historically as a more democratic take, which is let's make sure we don't let a bad merger get through. Right. So I think we're seeing that, but again, not a sea change from the Obama administration.
One area where things may have changed a bit, and this may have preceded this change in administration, is in the agency's approach to the remedies that they are looking for in deals. So wondering what you think about what's going on there and what you've seen and what you expect to happen. Sure.
It's certainly become more difficult, I think, to get remedies through on a number of fronts. And I think you're absolutely right that did precede this administration, but it's been a trend in part, I think, born out of a couple of public failures, maybe, that we've seen the agencies look back and say, wait a minute, maybe we're not being as stringent as we could be or should be, and maybe we can increase the failure rate. So I think as we sort of look forward here, on the FTC front, we've certainly seen Joe Simon say that bothers him, that he thinks one of his priorities will be to get the failure rate down on remedies to make sure that they work and to be more stringent on them. Certainly on the DOJ side, we've seen Megan Delrahim say he's not inclined to take behavioral fixes. He didn't say never, which a lot of people think he did, but he's not inclined to take them. It's going to be the unique case. And I think we've seen, certainly in my practice, we've seen the DOJ be much more stringent on order, holding parties to the letter of the order, I guess, is the way to put it, and making sure that when things get awry, that they clean it up and clean it up quickly, and put the onus on the parties to bear the burden of the cost of that. So I think the clear message from DOJ has been we're going to be tougher on orders up front, and you'd better stick to your obligations because you're going to pay if you don't.
Let me just ask a question about sort of the failed merger remedies. What's the agency's responsibility if there's a failed merger remedy to somehow fix that or adjust that if they didn't get it right the first time? Do they have an obligation to go back and fix it if it fails?
It's funny. Depending on the agency and the particular facts, it can be difficult for them to do that, right? If with a consent order, they can go back to modify it. They can try to modify a consent decree, but it's hard to do that, frankly. Once the water is under the bridge, it's hard to go back and fix something. They can certainly step in their monitoring role and try to right things that have gone astray, but they don't have nearly the ability, as they do prior to the order being entered, to set the conditions, right? They have to get approval, right? So I think that's something that they're very cognizant of and saying we need to get it right the first time. We need to get it right up front.
And so what are the, let me just explore that a little bit more. What are the things that they should be looking at up front to get it right so that they have fewer failures going forward?
Well, so let's start with conduct remedies, right? I mean, I think we've seen DOJ say we don't want to be policing conduct remedies. We don't. There are lots of ways that it's very difficult to write a conduct remedy that you know is going to work, right? Because there are lots of ways to game things. So I think you're seeing a pullback on the willingness to do that, and frankly, I think you'll see that at the FTC as well. Maybe not quite as much, quite as strident in that as DOJ, but I think you'll see less willingness to take conduct remedies as a fix. On divestitures, I think it comes to making sure that you get that your divestiture buyers are not just financially sound, which is very important, but that they really have a thorough business plan, that they really are taking on the assets that are being divested with some clear plan to operate them effectively, and then frankly the asset packages themselves. It's much harder today than it was, say, 10 or 15 years ago to sell off an asset package that's not a standalone, right? That isn't a standalone profit center, something that's operated or perhaps been bought and sold in the past as a standalone entity. It's if you're going to mix and match, that's a lot harder to do. You have a much steeper burden.
Right. All right. So we touched a little bit on this, but obviously with the AT&T Time Warner case, vertical mergers have become sort of a new big deal, and at least at DOJ, they seem to have a new appetite for taking on those kinds of cases. Would you view the AT&T Time Warner situation as an outlier, or do you think that's sort of a trend that we're going to see both agencies pursuing in the next few years?
So funny, I would probably put it in the middle. I think it's too early to call it a trend. And I do think that the agencies have raised concerns with vertical deals in the past. I think the big issue here is the fix, right? I think that in the past, agencies have been more willing to take behavioral remedies, and as a result, they've been able to resolve these things prior to litigation or prior to forcing, much larger divestitures. Here, you've seen obviously DOJ not willing to do that, and that led directly to the AT&T enforcement. I'm not sure it means they're going to be more aggressive. In fact, I think you could make the case that if they're going to demand structural fixes, then the burden of proof on bringing a case might be a lot higher, right? That's at least an argument, and we'll have to see how that plays out. I do think that they are not going to shy away from vertical cases. I think they recognize, and I think DOJ says in its pleadings, and I take them at their word, that most vertical mergers are just fine, but that when the ones come along that raise potential issues, I think they're not going to be shy to step in. With all that said, I think the outcome of this litigation is going to have a significant effect on the agency's willingness, thrill, maybe, to mix it up on a vertical case.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a big resource commitment to try any merger case, and the number of cases that you're going to be able to try is somewhat limited, so you got to pick your cases at some level a little bit carefully.
That's right. And one of the things that in a horizontal merger, the agencies get that presumption, right? The concentration presumption that you don't get in a vertical merger, and so it makes their job harder just at the outset, right? So I think we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, without that presumption, I think a lot of things aren't easy in merger litigation, so it's a good thing they still have that, at least for horizontal mergers. So another thing, timing seems to be a hot topic. It seems to be taking longer to get deals through. And it may be that we're just focusing on the high-profile deals that are taking much longer to get through, but what's your sense of what's going on with timing at the agencies?
Sure, I think there are a couple of things. I agree with you. I think it has taken longer in general to get deals through. Deals certainly that you know get investigated, right? And most deals still get through without substantial investigation, but of those that get investigated, I think it's taken longer. I actually think that some of that is the increase in foreign notification requirements and foreign review and coordination between the various agencies. So I think some of that is not so much U.S. agencies taking longer as it is just trying to coordinate. And that can affect the timing of your filing as well, for instance, right? It can delay that as well. So I think some of that is just the fact that it's a more complex set of regime regulations you have to get through around the globe. I do think that the current enforcement heads have a priority in making sure that parties understand that little problems that are little problems up front aren't necessarily going to go away because they're little problems, right? I think there have been at times in the past when if you have a very complex deal and you focus obviously on taking care of the biggest issues, there's a feeling that you can get enough momentum perhaps that everything else will get done even if it's done quickly, right? And I think the agencies are proving to be sticklers on even the little things. And I think sometimes that's caused parties to take more time than they had expected. And then lastly, I think it's fair to say that a lot of this is on the parties, right? I think that we've had a number of deals recently where we've gotten through on very crisp timelines because it was important up front, and we went in and engaged the agency, very quickly and very early, and tried to address concerns immediately. And I think if you're in a timing situation with your deal where that's a critical issue, you have to take that into account in terms of your strategy with the agencies. These guys, I think you see a lot less sort of duck and cover type filings, and more if you have an issue, it's better to start talking about it early. And I think that's increasingly becoming the way to go.
I know there were some speeches that some of the folks at the Department of Justice gave about trying to shorten the second request process, streamline the second request process. Have you seen any evidence of that in the deals that you've been working on?
I wish I could say yes. It hasn't made its way to the general population yet.
So it was a nice speech, but you haven't seen any thing come of it yet.
That's right, and it may come. I'm still hopeful, right? Yep. But so far, I have not seen anything significant in along those lines.
Well, at least they're thinking about it. At least they're talking about it, and they're aware of the problem.
That's right.
So
that's right.
Maybe
it's the first step.
Yeah, the first step is to acknowledge the problem. All right, so let's go back a little bit to the FTC. They've been operating with 2 commissioners for quite a long period of time now.
Yes.
So we're finally going to get commissioners approved, it looks like, pretty soon, we hope. So what do you expect from the new slate of commissioners?
I think you'll see Joe Simons particularly become a very forceful and effective chairman. I think if you look at his time as bureau director, you can see that he was a pretty effective bureau director. He had an effective chairman at that point in Tim Muris as well. But I think that Joe is he is exacting in demanding evidence from both his staff as well as the parties on the outside. I think he will be aggressive in that pursuit, not so much politically aggressive, but in that he's going to be very fact-based and fact-oriented, but he's going to demand high levels of proof from all parties, right? I do think that he has an idea of things that he wants to take care of, that he thinks need fixing, and I think he'll set right to that. And I think knowing Joe, and I've known him for a long time, he will not waste time doing that. It'll be very important to him to get started early, to get things moving. And again, this all goes back to when he was the bureau director. I think you will see certainly maybe additional willingness to consider economics than you may have seen from the current commission, but that's not a wild change. It's more around the edges. You know, he may be he's more economically oriented, so he may be more swayed by economic evidence.
All right, so last question. You expect to see a Section 2 case come out of the FTC?
I do. I think that I think you will see a vertical enforcement at the FTC. Maybe not immediately. I don't know of anything on the horizon. I think you'll see some consent decrees in the next 6 months, but I think you'll eventually see a litigation. My caveat on that will be, you know, let's see what happens in AT&T,
Right.
And what people think of that.
Okay. Mike, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today.
You bet. My
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
My pleasure.